Jimmy Makes Science Simple. It's my brand new show. If you haven't checked it out yet, I have an Instagram page for that. Jimmy Makes Science Simple is the Instagram name. But today we have a study, as I about poked my eye out with the study, a study all about the ketogenic diet as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. And so those of you that are unfamiliar with Alzheimer's disease and maybe why keto would work so well for it, let me explain. I remember back in the late 2000s, I was doing interviews on my podcast, and there were researchers coming on saying, oh, you know, Alzheimer's disease is referred to within research circles as type 3 diabetes. And this was like 2007 when I first heard this starting to be talked about. Now, everybody today knows about type 3 diabetes, being diabetes of the brain, manifesting as Alzheimer's. Everybody today generally recognizes that. But back then, it was only recognized within research circles. So now we're starting to see some trickling of some brand new research looking at the connection between why a ketogenic diet works so well to help people with Alzheimer's disease. So this is a really quality study, you guys. Really happy to be sharing this with you here today. It was published in the February 23rd, 2021 edition of the journal Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. The title of the research paper, Randomized Crossover Trial of a Modified Ketogenic Diet in Alzheimer's Disease. So randomized means at random. They didn't, assign people to different groups. They basically just pulled numbers out of a hat, and you're in this group or you're in that group. But the cool thing about this study is it's randomized, but it's also a crossover trial. So what's crossover? It means they do one of the wings of the trial first, then there's a washout period, and then they go to the other wing. So both groups got to experience both the ketogenic diet and the other modality. So really fascinating research. And again, just published a month and a half ago, February 23rd, was when it came out this year, Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. So let's get into this. If you're brand new to my show, Jimmy Makes Science Simple, I try to take studies in nutritional health and break them down into easy to understand language. Sometimes these studies come out and people just gloss over them, or they just read some mainstream article about them and they don't really get into the nitty gritty of why they apply to us as ketogenic dieters so much. So this is a really good one. If you know anybody in your life who's dealing with Alzheimer's disease or showing some early signs of Alzheimer's disease, this is going to be such an important research paper for you to tell them about. So let's get into the abstract. And those of you that are new to science terms, the abstract is where they basically do the Cliff's Notes version of the entire study, and then they get into the study itself. So let's see the abstract. Background. Brain energy metabolism is impaired with Alzheimer's disease, which may be mitigated by a ketogenic diet. We conducted a randomized crossover trial to determine whether over a 12-week modified ketogenic diet period, if it would improve cognition, daily function, or quality of life in a hospital clinic of Alzheimer's disease patients. So all of these patients had Alzheimer's disease and they wanted to see, hey, can we make it any better? And see, here's the thing about Alzheimer's disease. Most of the time they put them on drugs, and the drugs have such major side effects that it can be difficult that even if they did show improvements from the drug therapy, the side effects of the drug make it where they're still kind of zombies. And so this is why you see a lot of Alzheimer's patients just kind of staring off into Never Land until they feed them a modified ketogenic diet, as we're going to find out in this study. So the methods for this study, they randomly assigned patients with clinically confirmed diagnosis of Alzheimer's to a modified ketogenic diet or their usual diet supplemented with low-fat, healthy eating guidelines, basically based on the dietary guidelines for Americans. They enrolled them in a single phase, assessor blinded, meaning the people doing all the assessments and the numbers, they had no idea which wing they were on. 2-period crossover trials. So again, the 2-period, they put them on either the modified ketogenic diet and then a washout period, and then they put them on the low-fat, healthy eating diet with the usual diet that they would have for Alzheimer's disease. So they did that, 2 12-week treatment periods, and they did a 10-week washout period in between just to make sure there was still no lingering effects from the previous modality. Primary outcomes were within individual changes in what's called the Addenbrooke's cognitive examination. So I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I know they have them draw like a circle, and they have to do different little drawings, and they have to mimic that, and it's an indicator of how well their brain is functioning. I remember Dr. Mary Newport, who's done a lot of her own personal research on ketogenic diets and Alzheimer's. Her husband, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but I remember many years ago when I interviewed her, her husband had early onset Alzheimer's disease, and she started feeding him MCT oil, and then more into a ketogenic diet after that. And she saw that particular test, that drawing test, the Addenbrooke's cognitive examination, get better. So you could see where he struggled with the circle and all the things they had to draw. And then after having the MCT and getting his brain firing on ketones, saw marked improvement. They also do this thing called the AD Cooperative Study, Activities of Daily Living Inventory, as well as Quality of Life in Alzheimer's Disease Questionnaire. So they did that over a 12-week period. Secondary outcomes in this study considered changes in their cardiovascular risk markers, things like triglyceride to HDL ratio, small dense LDL. We're going to get into what the things were here in a minute. So what were the results? So they had a total of 26 people in the study. They randomized them. 21 of them, which was 81% of the original number, completed the ketogenic diet. Only one withdrawal was attributed because of the ketogenic diet. While on the keto diet, patients achieved sustained physiological ketosis. 12-week average beta-hydroxybutyrate levels were well within the nutritional ketosis range. Compared with the usual diet, patients on the ketogenic diet increased their mean within individual ADCS-ADL. That's all those tests I was just telling you about above. So all of them increased their and improved their average on those tests. The only one that didn't increase significantly was the ACE-3 test, which was the Addenbrooke's cognitive test. That was the only one that did not increase significantly. It did increase, but not as big as the other ones did. Changes in cardiovascular risk markers were mostly favorable, and any adverse effects were mild. So they probably are interpreting LDL cholesterol going up as an adverse effect, but we know that's not accurate. So what were the conclusions in this study? This was the very first randomized trial to investigate the impact of a ketogenic diet in patients who had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. High rates of retention, remember it was 81% of the people finished it. Adherence, that means they did the diet. And safety, meaning the diet did not cause any harm to them, appear to be achievable applying a 12-week modified ketogenic diet to the Alzheimer's disease patients. Compared with their usual diet, supplemented with low-fat healthy eating guidelines, patients on the ketogenic diet improved their daily function and their quality of life, two of the greatest importance of factors for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So that's pretty cool, huh? That's the diet in a nutshell, the study in a nutshell, talking about the diet impacting Alzheimer's disease. And if you just joined us, welcome to Jimmy Makes Science Simple. This is my brand new show that I just started talking about studies and trying to simplify the language so you can get the biggest points out of these studies. There's so many great research papers coming out, and they don't come out real fast, so I'm not going to do the show every single day, but if there is a big study like this one here today, I will always bring it to you and then try to simplify the language for you. Again, this one was published in the February 23rd, 2021 issue of the journal Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. And the title of the study, Randomized Crossover Trial of a Modified Ketogenic Diet in Alzheimer's Disease. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this study. Introduction. Despite extensive efforts towards prevention and remediation, dementia remains an urgent public health priority, affecting over 50 million people worldwide. The majority of people with dementia have Alzheimer's disease, a disorder that characteristically results in a progressive cognitive and functional decline. Supportive care remains the mainstay of treatment, and brand new strategies are sorely needed. So brain energy metabolism is impaired when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. This is why nutritional ketosis is so effective, because it's an alternative fuel source that when you have that type 3 diabetes kick in and glucose is going wild in the brain, you need a different energy substrate to feed the brain. And this is why it has been hypothesized that it would be helpful for people. And they're looking at a lot of the research on epilepsy, Parkinson's. There's a lot of really strong research out there looking at a ketogenic diet for neurodegenerative types of diseases. So compared with healthy controls, people with Alzheimer's disease display lower levels of brain insulin signaling and fewer brain insulin receptors, culminating in insulin resistance of the brain. So thus, there's the type 3 diabetes we were talking about. PET scan studies demonstrate that there is a 20 to 25% deficiency in cerebral glucose metabolism. Alzheimer's disease neurons also exhibit diminished numbers of mitochondria, many of which show reduced citric acid cycle and respiratory chain activity, culminating in a decreased energy production. So ketogenic diets can theoretically mitigate any impaired brain energy metabolism for those people with Alzheimer's disease, leading to improved cognition, daily function, and quality of life. Ketogenic diets are defined as high-fat, low-carbohydrate diets that shift the body towards a fat metabolism. Neurons, listen to this, you guys. Neurons cannot metabolize fats directly, but the liver can convert the fats into ketone bodies, which serve as a major neuron energy source. Are you seeing why it's so helpful? It's okay to know that, okay, eating keto is going to produce improvements, but the why is because the body has a very sophisticated way to convert the fat through the liver into ketones, which then become the major energy source for the brain. During a typical Western diet, the concentration of the primary blood ketone, called beta-hydroxybutyrate, will supply less than 5% of the brain's energy, and its blood concentration rarely goes to that nutritional ketosis minimum of 0.5 millimole. By contrast, though, a ketogenic diet induces a physiological ketosis in which beta-hydroxybutyrate provides a great contribution to brain energy, and the blood concentration easily exceeds the 0.5 millimole. Compared with glucose, ketones produce more energy per unit oxygen. Cerebral ketone metabolism remains normal in Alzheimer's disease. This is the coolest part. If somebody has mild onset of Alzheimer's symptoms and they're already kind of coming in and out of the disease state and consciousness and being able to understand what's going on, you feed them a ketogenic diet, they come back alive again. If you ever saw the Robin Williams movie, what was that movie called? Awakenings, where they had the patients come alive. It's kind of like that with Alzheimer's disease when people go on a ketogenic diet. So what that does is it potentially compensates for the brain insulin resistance and deficient glucose metabolism. And that makes sense too, that if it's insulin resistance of the brain, if it's diabetes of the brain, type 3 diabetes, it makes sense, just like keto helps with type 2 diabetes, and even for type 1, it helps to control the amount of insulin a type 1 has to use. It stands to reason that that same metabolic pathway is going to help the brain health of someone with type 3 diabetes. Ketogenic diets also typically upregulate mitochondria biogenesis and induce expression of genes associated with the citric acid cycle and respiratory chain, thus increasing the neuron energy production. So to date, all they've had is 2 clinical trials that have examined the symptomatic effects of using a ketogenic diet for Alzheimer's patients. A single arm study examined the impact of a 12-week keto diet on 15 patients. The 11 people who completed that study improved their cognitive scores, but the lack of any control group meant additional contributing factors could not be ruled out. A second ongoing randomized control trial, so it's still being conducted, it's not yet published, has provided preliminary data on the impact of a 12-week modified Atkins diet versus a recommended diet in 14 patients who exhibit mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease. The most adherent patients saw improvements in their memory scores, but overall adherence was only okay and function did not improve. So far, that's it. Before this study here that I'm reading to you now, that's it. And one of them is not even published yet, and it's even showing lackadaisical kind of results. So this study here is truly landmark, guys. On this background, we wanted to conduct a randomized crossover trial to determine whether a 12-week modified ketogenic diet would be well tolerated, would improve cognition, daily function, or quality of life in a hospital clinic of people with Alzheimer's disease. So let's get into the trial design. So this was a single-phase, assessor-blinded, 2-period randomized crossover trial. It took place at Waikato Hospital, which is in Hamilton, New Zealand. The trial was approved, and all the ethics committee looked at it. So then patients and trial partners attended a screening visit in July of 2019, and then diet instruction was given in August of 2019. By September 2019, patients were randomized to a modified ketogenic diet, which they're calling the intervention diet. That's what they wanted to see what would happen. Or they were told to stay on their usual diet and then supplement it with low-fat, healthy eating guidelines and recipes. So they considered that the control diet. The crossover design specified 2 12-week treatment periods that would be separated by a 10-week washout period during which patients just had their usual diet. Cognitive changes induced by a ketogenic diet in the Alzheimer's disease returned to baseline after 1 month. So they gave them 10 weeks, but all the numbers came back to baseline when they were off of keto for just 4 weeks. For each treatment period, assessments were made at baseline, then again at week 6, and then again at the end of the study at week 12. So let's take a look at the patient profile. The trial was advertised in newspapers and regional dementia organizations. Volunteers attended a 2-hour screening visit that included a description of what the trial is about, medical history, evaluation of their current diagnostic criteria for a probable Alzheimer's disease, dementia severity rating scale, Alzheimer's disease informed consent questionnaire, geriatric depression scale, this thing called Hachinsky ischemia scale, I'm not sure what that is, body mass index calculations, and assuming consent capacity, a written informed consent from both the patient as well as the trial. So they made sure they crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's on this study. In order to be eligible, they had to be between the ages of 50 to 90 years of age. They had to satisfy all the criteria for a probable Alzheimer's disease, which had to be confirmed by either a neurologist or a geriatrician. They had a dementia severity rating score of over 19, a body mass index less than 18.5, a cohabitating trial partner willing to at least partly partake in the ketogenic diet. That's an interesting one. They wanted support for them, and so they said, okay, your partner has to join you. That's interesting. Exclusion criteria included moderate or severe depression, substantial cerebrovascular disease, a change in, I knew they were going to give me a long word, acetylcholine esterase, I believe is how you say that, inhibitor dose within the past 6 weeks, and a concurrent medical or psychiatric disorder judged likely to create difficulty for completing the trial. So they're eliminating anyone that could be a confounding variable in the study. Patients also had recent, within 1 year, blood investigations. They wanted to know their cell count, their electrolytes, creatinine, liver function, thyroid stimulating hormone, B12, and folate. All of those had to be in the normal range to be a part of this study, as well as within the previous 2 years, a CT or MRI brain imaging showing no changes beyond age-appropriate progression of Alzheimer's disease. So let's take a look at the diets. Following all those screenings, eligible patients and trial partners attended a 1-hour diet instruction visit. They were shown how to use a complementary blood glucose and ketone monitor. They used the Freestyle Neo, which is out of Abbott in Whitney, UK. They also completed a 3-day, 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day food record, and they had to follow the diet plans prescribed. Blood was taken for ApoE genotype, so apolipoprotein E. This is a key genetic marker that shows if you have a genetic predisposition for diabetes. It also has some other cardiovascular implications, but for the purposes of this study, they wanted to see what their ApoE genotype. And once you run your ApoE, you know what it is. Like, I'm a 3-3 ApoE genotype. That's the most common in the world. 70% of the people are a 3-3. It's when you have a 2 or a 4 that it starts to become problematic. And if you have 2 4s, it's really problematic cardiovascular disease-wise. Both of the diet plans contain guidelines for the people to follow, space to record daily bedtime blood glucose and ketone levels, and recipes. So they only had them record their bedtime glucose and ketone levels. Now that's interesting. I know from my own experience of doing lots of N=1 studies on myself, when I test in the morning, that tends to be the lowest readings of the day for nutritional ketosis. And then in the evening, at least 4 hours after my last meal, that tends to be one of the higher readings of the entire day. So I guess they want to make sure whatever maximal ketone production that they had, they're trying to capture that. And then blood glucose, same thing. Sometimes early in the morning when you're eating a ketogenic diet, you're going to see kind of a physiologic insulin resistance. Some people call it a dawn phenomenon, where you have an elevation in your blood glucose in the mornings, but then throughout the rest of the day, it's better. And definitely by night, it would be in an ideal range. Patients on the ketogenic diet were instructed to eat all of the meals from the plan unless they attended a social event in which case meal advice was given. They had numerous recipe options providing an average macronutrient breakdown of 58% fat, which is 26% saturated fat, 32% non-saturated, 29% protein, 7% fiber, 6% net carbs by weight. Now, just looking at that diet at face value, that's a little on the low end of fat and a little on the higher end of carbohydrate and protein, just slightly. I'm okay with the 29% protein, but 58% fat, that's kind of curious to me. They could have looked at some of the epilepsy research and seen that those people that looked at a ketogenic diet for epilepsy had a much higher level of fat, almost to 90%. And so that's interesting. They only kept them at 58% fat and mostly non-saturated fat. 29% protein. They probably could have gone a little bit lower for therapeutic effects for ketosis. And then 7% fiber and 6% net carbs. So the 6% net carbs is actually total carbs a lot more. So carbohydrate content is over 15% of their calories. It's amazing they found good results, because I'm looking at this diet and going, okay, did they do that because they thought it would be more doable? Like, what would be the reason why they wouldn't have shot the fat a little bit higher? Anyway, let's get back to what they actually ate. Main dietary constituents were green vegetables, that's good, meats, eggs, nuts, seeds, creams, and natural oils. The usual diet plan contained optional low-fat recipes in accordance with all the healthy eating guidelines from New Zealand. And here's what that diet looked like. Average ratio of 11% fat, 3% saturated, 8% non-saturated, 19% protein, 8% fiber, and 62% net carbohydrates. So let's do the quick math there. looks like 30% was fat and protein, which means 70% of their diet was carbohydrate. Yikes. Constituents were mainly green and root vegetables in that diet, along with meats, legumes, whole grains, and fruits. Both diets were supplemented with a multivitamin, and that's what they ate. All right, so then let's look at the randomization and blinding. Following stratification by dementia, severity rating scale score, and BMI, the trial statistician randomized the patients to the intervention or the control diet. Diet-related discussion between the assessors and patients were prohibited. They weren't even allowed to talk about what they were going through all throughout the trial. And remember, it was a 12-week trial, then a 10-week washout period, and then another 12 weeks. So this was a very long study. To prevent detection of acetone breath. Oh, this is funny. Listen to this. Because when you have ketosis breath, it's very noticeable. So to prevent the researchers from detecting it on the patient's breath, a fragrance diffusing scent called Naturals Diffuser, which is like a essential oils company, was placed between the assessors and the patients for every assessment. Now, isn't that interesting? They're like, we don't want you to smell a stinky keto breath, but yeah, that's funny. That's funny they even thought to do that. But good job with the researchers knowing to do that. All right, so now let's look at the assessments. Patients and trial partners attended 3 one-hour assessments over each of the 12-week treatment periods. A baseline assessment was made during the week prior to commencing the treatment period, followed by assessments at week 6 and week 12. Assessments evaluated patient cognition, daily function, and their quality of life. Patients and trial partners were evaluated by the exact same assessor at baseline and at week 12 on the same weekday and the same hour. They weren't playing around. They wanted to have apples to apples comparison at exactly 12 weeks apart. Cognition was assessed using all those tests we talked about earlier. The ACE-3 test assessed 19 activities pertaining to 5 cognitive domains: attention, memory, fluency, language, and this thing called visual spatial ability. In other words, being able to see the difference between where things are in relation to each other. It has been objectively validated with high levels of correlation shown between domain scores and performance of standard neurophysiological measures, and is the primary cognitive assessment battery used in the hospital. So All right, so then down looking at the body weight measurements, they did that, as well as blood tests for HbA1c, so that's a key blood sugar marker, the average blood sugar for the past 3 months, triglyceride levels, which we know is the blood fat, and it's one of the key markers on a standard lipid panel, standard cholesterol, that gets better, markedly better when you go on a ketogenic diet. HDL cholesterol, another one that gets markedly better. Low density lipoproteins, that's LDL, and I'm assuming they just did the LDL-C, which is that estimated calculated LDL, and not like the NMR getting a fancy schmancy particle size test. And then the total cholesterol. An adverse effects questionnaire was given to both the patient and the trial partner by a nutrition specialist at week 6 and 12. And the week 12 assessment for the second treatment period included a questionnaire asking whether the patient or trial partner would like to continue on with the ketogenic diet after it's over. Now that's interesting. That's really interesting, because if they enjoyed it and they saw great improvements in their Alzheimer's, why would they not continue on? But that's an interesting question they asked at the end. So let's look at the washout period. During the first treatment period, patients and trial partners were prohibited from making copies of their diet plans. At the week 12 assessment, all plans were returned and a 10-week washout period ensued. Over this interval, patients and trial partners were repeatedly reminded to go back to their usual diet. Yeah, because it would have defeated the purpose if they continued on with the ketogenic diet. Can you imagine being in that first group of patients that was on the ketogenic diet, and you felt better, and you got your brain health back, and all these things got better, and then they're like, yeah, you know how good you feel? Yeah, screw all that. You got to go to 10 weeks of your usual diet. And you're like, I don't want to feel bad again. Like, it's so, I mean, I get it, for research purposes, you want to keep the integrity of it so you can actually show the results, but I'm sure there was a temptation for them to not want to actually wash out, but to keep up the benefits. But for the purposes of a study, they knew what they signed up for. All right, let's look at the educational program. The lead investigator and nutrition specialist delivered an educational program consisting of 2 global emails a week, a 10-minute video posted on the website for the trial every weekend. The program provided information about facts and misconceptions related to both ketogenic diets as well as low-fat diets. Both diet approaches were consistently presented as a potentially healthy modality, and all patients were encouraged to eat until satiation. I love that they did this because I'm sure people's brains were going wild, especially in the keto diet group. Oh my gosh, is this going to clog my arteries? All this fat that I'm eating, oh my gosh. And so you're having all these trepidations. But if you get a video that's basically hyping up the diet you're eating, you're getting a couple of emails a week encouraging you, hey, how you doing? I hope it's going well. Don't fear the fat. Eat that fat. It's good for you, blah, blah, blah. And then on the flip side, the ones that are on the 70% carb and very low fat diet, same thing. Oh, well, the carbs are giving you energy. So they were just trying to make sure they complied with the wing of the diet they were on. So let's look at the primary and secondary outcomes of this study. Primary outcomes were mean within individual changes in cognition. That's the ACE-3 test. Daily function test, the ADCS-ADL test. Quality of life, the QOL-AD test, from baseline to week 12. Secondary outcomes include mean within individual changes in all of those cardiovascular risk markers, weight, BMI, HbA1c, triglycerides, ACL, LDL, total cholesterol, from baseline to week 12. Let's see. I don't need to go over the statistical analysis because that's usually pretty boring, and I'm reading it and it's very boring. So I'm gonna skip over that. Let's get right to the results. In the patient flow of the 26 patients, 20 of them completed the keto diet and all completed their usual diet supplemented with low-fat, healthy eating guidelines. 4 out of the 5 withdrawals from the ketogenic diet resulted from the patient's refusal to alter their diet, creating conflict with the trial partner. I bet those are the ones where family members were like, all that fat's going to kill them faster. They already have Alzheimer. And so they probably had some of that going on. And that's unfortunate because I think all of them probably would have done just fine with it. But because of these fears, and again, this is why you hear me all the time try to relax people's fears about cardiovascular risks when it comes to eating saturated fat, for example, and all the other myths of keto I've been talking about for years. Only 1 withdrawal was attributed to any ill effects of the ketogenic diet. This patient increased their coconut oil intake well beyond the recommended amount, and it resulted in diarrhea. By the way, if you take MCT oil more than a little bit, you're going to get diarrhea. If you take a lot of fat and you don't have good fat absorption enzymes to break it down, you're going to get diarrhea. So this is not surprising at all. It's too bad that patient had to drop out. At the week 12 assessment of the second treatment period, 13, which is 50% of the patients, and 54% of the trial partners, stated that they intended to keep going with the keto diet. So half of the patients said, yeah, I like this keto diet. I want to keep going with it. So that was kind of cool as well. All right, the baseline characteristics for all randomized patients are shown in table 1. Let's see if there's anything interesting in there. Okay, so let's see. Baseline statistics. I'm just trying to see if there's anything in there that's of interest. Oh, yeah, it is of interest. Here we go. So they assessed them for the trial eligibility. That was 53 people. They had to get rid of 3 people for overseas during the trial. 2 of them had mixed dementia. 2 of them had vascular dementia. 1 had functional neurological disorder. 1 had lung cancer. 1 had unexpected illness during the screening, and then 1 was too busy with work. So then that left 42 patients. Then they lost 16 of those for various reasons that they didn't fit the category of what they were looking for. That left 26 patients who then went on it. Those who went on the keto diet, 2 of them withdrew from the keto diet. They declined to remove daily sugar, one of them. I gotta have my sugar. And so they kind of kept the sugar in their diet, and you can do that. And then the one I was just telling you about, they had too much coconut oil, which then led to diarrhea. Another one withdrew from the usual diet. No, nobody withdrew from the usual diet. So then after the washout period, they did the switch, they did the crossover. And again, there was no withdrawals from the usual diet, which was the low-fat diet. And then when they had 3 of them drop out, one of them declined to alter his diet. Why are you in a study if you're not willing to do the study modality that they're trying to look at? Anyway, one of them didn't want to remove their daily beer. Remember, this is New Zealand. I've been to Australia and New Zealand. I remember Australia, they like their alcohol. I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. And then the last one that declined most of the keto foods. They didn't like it. They didn't want to do it. So that left 26 people that were analyzed at the end. Patients intending to continue after the trial was a total of 13. So that's pretty good. So the sole significant difference between the 2 treatment sequence groups was a larger proportion of ApoE4 carriers. Remember, I told you about the 4/4s have huge cardiovascular risk markers, but even for the purposes of Alzheimer's, if you have a 2 or a 4, it can be actually problematic as well. And that was in the usual ketogenic diet sequence. So when they did the usual first, and then the 10-week washout period, and then the 12 weeks of the ketogenic diet, that made a difference between the 2 patient populations if they had an ApoE4 allele in their background. All right. Adherence, mean weekly blood glucose and beta-hydroxybutyrate levels were measured. The 12-week mean difference with respect to blood glucose versus the ketogenic diet. It was obvious the glucose was lower in the ketogenic diet group, and the beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the blood ketone, was obviously what looks like 4.5 times higher in those with ketosis diet than the usual diet. Of the 21 patients who completed the ketogenic diet, 18 of them actually had sustained physiological ketosis. And again, if you remember earlier, it was only 58% fat, and it was 29% protein and over 15% carbohydrate. I don't know anybody that is a practitioner that uses those as a therapeutic way to try to get you into a state of ketosis. I think they could have bumped up the fat to at least 70-75%. They probably could have titrated down a little bit, maybe to 25% on the protein, and then limit the carbohydrate a little more, and they would have easily gotten higher levels of nutritional ketosis. If that was the goal, get them in ketosis. Let's see what keto and all those beta-hydroxybutyrate can do for their brain health. If they wanted to see that, they could have done it a lot easier than they did, which makes the fact that they had great results with keto so amazing. How much more greater results would they have had if they did a well-formulated kind of traditional therapeutic ketogenic diet? So all the primary outcomes were measured: cognition, daily function, quality of life. The baseline means did not differ between any 2 comparison groups. Compared with the usual diet, the patients on the ketogenic diet showed only a modest trend level change in that ACE3 test, which we were talking about, from baseline to 12, whereas all the increases in the ADCS-ADL, as well as the QOL-AD, both of those were markedly better. All right, cognition, daily function, quality of life data for completers who remained on the protocol for both of the treatment periods achieved sustained physiological ketosis during the ketogenic diet intervention. Primary outcomes remained similar and the statistical conclusions unchanged. What about those secondary outcomes, the cardiovascular risk markers, and especially since most of them tended to be the ApoE4 genotype? Cardiovascular risk data are shown in table 4, which I'll just summarize for you. The baseline means did not differ. In other words, they had similar numbers. Compared with the usual diet, the patients on the ketogenic diet had lots of predictable things happen. They saw a drop in their weight, a lowering of their BMI, a drop in the HbA1c. But here was the funny one. Listen to this. They did not alter their triglycerides. Anybody that's ever been on a ketogenic diet, one of the hallmarks of lowering carbohydrates enough and eating enough fat and having that proper balance between low carb, high fat you see your trigs fall. But in this 12-week study, in 12 weeks, they did not see their trigs change. To me, that's suspect. To me, that tells me they could have done a better job of putting them into a well-formulated ketogenic diet, not this 58% fat, over 15% carbohydrate, and 29% protein. Again, I don't have so much issue with the protein, but the fat and the carbs I have a big problem with. They could have easily adjusted the carbs down, raised the fat a little bit more, and they would have saw better results in this study. But they didn't ask Jimmy Moore. So compared with the usual diet, they also did see increases in their HDL, which is predictable. LDL also went up, which in a lot of people is predictable as well. We know LDL going up is not a big deal. Sometimes it's the small, dense LDL that gets eliminated and you turn into the large, fluffy LDL, and that can show up as higher LDL particles. Plus, we know that when you get your HDL higher, and typically your triglycerides lower, which they didn't in this study, but HDL higher, you're going to see a miscalculation of that LDL-C number. So unless they ran an NMR lipoprofile or some other particle size test, they would not know what actually happened to the quality of that LDL. Was it the pattern A or pattern B? The pattern B would be the small dense. I would assume they probably had mostly pattern A. And then they also measured total cholesterol, and it went up. But it makes sense. Their HDL went up. HDL is a part of the total cholesterol. Not surprising that it would go up like that. All right, let's see. Adverse effects. The most common adverse effects on both diets was irritability. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're not used to keto, have you ever heard of keto flu? Like the first couple weeks of keto can be hell if you don't properly electrolyte yourself. They didn't mention anything about supplementing them with electrolytes, but I would hope they had a nutritionist watching them. They would give them that instruction. There was no serious adverse events, though, that occurred on the ketogenic diet. All right, so let's get to the discussion. To our knowledge, this is the first ever randomized controlled trial to investigate the impact of a ketogenic diet in patients with a uniform diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Our findings suggest that high rates of retention and adherence are achievable with a 12-week modified ketogenic diet to Alzheimer's. Compared with the usual diet supplemented with low-fat, healthy eating guidelines, patients on the ketogenic diet improved in their daily function as well as their quality of life. Changes in cardiovascular risk factors were mostly favorable. Adverse effects were mild. All right, let's skip down because it looks like they do have some information about MCT that they gave them. All right, so this is interesting. So half of the patients and trial partners said that they intended to continue the ketogenic diet after the trial. This proportion is also very high given that the ketogenic diet was considered unpalatable. What did they feed these people? If they think a ketogenic diet is unpalatable compared to a low-fat, healthy eating diet, what did they feed them if it was unpalatable? I wonder what comprised those 15+% carbohydrates. I wonder if they got some weird fats in there somehow. They did say they limited the saturated fat, but then it was mostly unsaturated fats, which when they say unsaturated, that's both mono-unsaturated and poly-unsaturated fats. I wonder if they snuck in some vegetable oils and they were getting some negative effects of some of the inflammation that would come from consuming vegetable oils. They did say oil and other oils. So that wasn't explicitly detailed in this study. That would be interesting to know. We partially attribute all the results to our Alzheimer's disease tailored ketogenic diet, which utilized affordable and simple recipes aiming at satisfying a typical preference for sweet foods. So, there we go. Now we're getting some clues here. So they wanted them to have some sweet things. We know that some people with some of the artificial sweeteners, which I assume is what they mean by sweet foods, maybe they had a little bit of fruit in there, but some people get an insulin response from just the taste of sweet on the tongue. Another confounding variable in this study that they're not identifying could have contributed to the less than desirable results. They had good results, and I'm trying to celebrate that with you here today so you see it, but I'm showing you all the ways they could have made this study Even better, the design itself is okay, but they could have improved the quality of the ketogenic diet, made it a more classical ketogenic therapeutic diet for brain health, and they would have saw massively better results. The high retention rate may also relate to our exclusion of MCT oil, which produced adverse gastrointestinal effects. Well, I mean, if you give them too much, yeah, but you could give them small doses, even like a teaspoon or two of MCT, and it would have definitely helped boost some of the beta hydroxybutyrate levels. Importantly, only one withdrawal was attributed to ill effects of the ketogenic diet, even though the trial partner was very enthusiastic. The fact that the remaining 4 non-completers declared no interest in altering their usual diet suggests patient motivation is essential when commencing a ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's disease. You know what I'd like to see if they do another study to this effect? Try a carnivore diet. I wonder how many of them would eat a more carnivorous diet, eliminate carbohydrates completely, have them eat ribeye steaks and other fatty sources of proteins from the animal kingdom and eggs and things like that. They pretty much were most of the way there with the foods they were eating. Just eliminate all that unnecessary stuff and have them have appropriate amounts of the MCT oil or even some exogenous ketone. I mean, there's any number of ways they could have made this to give them the results that they were looking for. But again, they didn't do that. Patients on the ketogenic diet achieved a 12-week mean beta hydroxybutyrate level well within nutritional ketosis. It's consistent with the physiological ketosis response to ketones, supplying 12 to 15% of their brain energy requirements. This level compares favorably to the average in previous studies using ketosis for Alzheimer's, and it indicates that most of the patients adhered to the diet, 18 patients having sustained ketosis. We attribute that high adherence to our very specialized diet. They're really proud of themselves about that diet. I think the diet sucked, if you ask me. They could have done a much better job and gotten just as good of compliance. I guess that's always the trickiness when you're a researcher. We want to make it palatable. We want them to be compliant so they complete the study. You don't want a 50% dropout. They had just under a 20% dropout total. All right, so they also said the blood ketone meters and blood sugar meters were easy to operate, use daily. Food records reflect adherence to the prescribed diet, but do not relay the actual level of ketosis when they show their food. That can also be a burden for people who are cognitively impaired. Although cognition is an important outcome in measuring Alzheimer's disease, daily function and quality of life are factors of great importance to people with dementia, as well as how they feel. We measured changes in these variables as primary outcomes. All right, let's skip on down a little bit more. All right. Whether ketogenic diets offer any benefits for cardiovascular health remains controversial. The changes observed in the trial were mostly favorable. Patients on the ketogenic diet lost, 3.29 kilos. So that's right around 11 pounds. Weight loss has been associated with increased mortality in Alzheimer's disease, but that observation may relate to appetite changes. By contrast, our patients were generally overweight and they were pleased that they lost weight. Moreover, patients on the ketogenic diet decreased their A1C, saw the triglycerides stay the same, and saw their HDL go up. There were modest increases in LDL and total cholesterol, but the impact was minimal and it's still highly debated. Adverse effects were mild. The most common was irritability, and agitation is frequently observed in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Patients on the ketogenic diet experienced nearly twice as many adverse effects in week 6 as they did in week 12. So it took them a while to get keto adapted. And I think it's because they were kept in such a low level of nutritional ketosis on the lower end of that had they gone higher in the fat and lower in the carbohydrate, they would have got well keto adapted within about 2 to 4 weeks at the most, not all the way to 6 weeks and still struggling. I think they were coming in and out of ketosis, and they weren't ever fully getting keto adapted during that adaptation period. But by week 12, they were. Our use of a randomized crossover design may raise potential concerns about any carryover effects, which is why they had the 10-week washout period. Given that cognitive changes, if any, induced by a ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's disease typically returns to baseline by 1 month, we thought the 10-week washout period was sufficient to avoid any hangover effects of the previous diet. We also compared the baseline for all comparison groups, and the 10-week interval was short enough to avoid outcome changes that would lead to more Alzheimer's disease progression. Several trial strengths should be mentioned. First, all of the patients had uniform diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Second, they utilized a single-phase design, strictly enforced the timing of it, meaning they all did 12 weeks, they all did a 10-week washout, and then they all did 12 weeks again. They also diet blinded the assessors, validated assessment tools to minimize assessment bias. Third, the tailored diet plan contained a variety of affordable and simple recipes, which appeared to have promoted the retention rate as well as promoted ketosis. Fourth, along with cognition, our primary outcomes included changes in daily function and quality of life, which are the factors of particular importance for people with Alzheimer's disease. What were some of the limitations, though? Among its limitations, the trial sample size and duration was actually kind of small. A larger sample or longer diet intervention could have provided more statistical power. Thus, our findings should be considered as preliminary. I love when they do this, that they admit, okay, it's a small study, but we need bigger studies. The problem is, and I've seen this with some of the cancer and ketogenic trials, it's hard to find patients. And especially if they were in this one area in New Zealand, and they all had to be in this hospital for 12 weeks, and then the washout period of 10 weeks, and then another 12, that's problematic to be that long with that. And if they increase the numbers, they could do it, I suppose, but they would have trouble finding enough patients. Second, even with rigorous application of the criteria for Alzheimer's disease, the clinical diagnostic accuracy for distinguishing these is limited, and we might have enrolled some people that maybe didn't have advanced level of Alzheimer's disease. We attempted to mitigate the concern by ensuring every patient had recent brain imaging, which would be a diagnostic accuracy for Alzheimer's. Third, although the assessors were blinded to the diet, patients and trial partners could not be blinded to what they were eating. And so patients and trial partners had an awareness, the patients had an awareness that they may have resulted in different expectations. So they knew when they switched over, oh wow, this is a little more fatty. Oh wow, this has a lot less carbs on the plate. This must be the ketogenic. I mean, patients will run wild with what they imagine. So we tried to mitigate the possibility by presenting both of them as potentially healthy. Fourth, patients on the ketogenic diet experienced a modest degree of weight loss compared to the usual diet, and this in and of itself may have also affected the clinical outcomes. That's interesting too, that weight loss actually does improve like signs of insulin resistance. And so it makes sense. It might have contributed the weight loss, not the ketones, but the weight loss in the trial participants could have improved the insulin resistance in their brain, which gave them some of the benefits. Now, some people are like, well, who cares? You got benefit. Well, you kind of want to tease out what gave the benefit. Was it the weight loss or was it the increase in the ketones? We try to mitigate. Fifth, patients were repeatedly assessed using the same cognitive scale, which may have resulted in a learned effect of subsequent testing. So if they did a test and then they did the same test again, they might remember what the test is and how they're supposed to perform, and maybe that resulted in them improving. I love when researchers are very open about some of the limitations of, okay, this might be a confounding variable, we're not sure, but we're going to put it in the paper. That's good researchers there. We tried to mitigate this particular concern by utilizing different versions of the ACE3 test throughout the trial. Moreover, even if a learning effect occurred, it would logically have affected both diets. So that's true. And now in conclusion, we're almost at the end, you guys. Our findings suggest that high rates of retention and adherence are achievable in applying a 12-week modified ketogenic diet to AD patients compared with the usual diet supplemented with low fat. Patients on the ketogenic diet improved in daily function and quality of life, two factors of great importance to people living with dementia. Changes in cardiovascular risk were mostly favorable, adverse effects mild. Keto may hold promise as viable and effective treatment for strategies in Alzheimer's disease, but larger and longer studies are needed before this can be stated with confidence. I don't care if they think they need larger studies. This was a good study. Other than some of the things I mentioned in there, they could have done a better, well-formulated ketogenic diet. But for what they found with a crappy version of the keto diet, I think it's pretty good. So if you joined us late, this was published in the February 23rd, 2021 issue of a journal called Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. It's a randomized crossover trial of a modified ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's disease. And you can go Google that, look it up, and check out the study. All right, I want to see what you guys have to say, so we're going to go over here to Instagram Live. We are live also over on Facebook. Thank you all for being here, as well as over on my Clubhouse page, the Keto Clarity Clubhouse. Hello, Emily and Navidad and Joshua and Roxanne. Any of you that want to come up on stage and talk about this one, would love to have you come up and add your contribution. Raise that little hand icon at the bottom. We'll pop you up on stage and let you make your comments. But let's go over here to Instagram first. What's up, Instagram? What you got for me? Anything? Thanks for making all this simple. That's why I created Jimmy Makes Science Simple, is I feel like there's so much research that comes out and it just gets glossed over because most people don't dig into the nitty gritty like I did here today with this. But yeah, and I love doing that. It's fun to kind of see, and I love giving my commentary about how they could have made it a little bit better of a study. Thank you for taking the time to explain all of this. You're welcome. Thank you for all the information. I have to go, but I didn't want to be rude and not say goodbye. Well, you can say hello, goodbye, all you need to. Thank you for that, though. That's very sweet. So I have very considerate Instagram followers. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let's pop over here over to Facebook. My mother-in-law is dealing with Alzheimer's right now. We're trying so hard to get her to understand the changes that she can make to improve. When I wrote Keto Clarity, we put in there that this was emerging evidence. And so check out Keto Clarity. We do have a part in there where I did mention those studies that they said, but it's limited studies for now. I'm really glad we got another one to add to the discussion because this is one of those things, especially since it's another form of diabetes. It makes sense that a ketogenic diet would be helpful. All right, Clubhouse, speak now or forever hold your peace. I'm gonna get off of here in a second, but I wanna give you one more chance to pop up on stage. Raise your hand, I'll get you up here and you can share your thoughts about what you thought about this study. Going once. All right, Roxanne wants to say something. What you got for me, Roxanne? Go ahead, sweetie.
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you so much for
Sure.
the information. I just wanted to say that my grandmother passed away from dementia and Alzheimer's, but she was very old, in her 80s. And I have some neighbors who had their mothers diagnosed with dementia, and I would suggest, maybe you should look up keto, my problem is nobody wants, the older generation, they don't want to try it. That's all. I just wanted to say that
Yeah.
It's hard. It's kind of a hard buy-in
Yeah.
for people in their 70s. I have an aunt and uncle who are 75, host of problems, all kind. I'm like, maybe try giving up things to see if the inflammation goes away, of the arthritis, and they just won't do it. And
Yeah.
it's just difficult. That's all I have to say. But
Yeah.
thanks for the information.
You're welcome. And I think that's a product of that generation. They very much have white coat syndrome. And my mom and dad are in their 70s now, so they're of that generation that they just buy into everything the doctor tells them. And of course, doctors vilify the ketogenic diet. They have forever. And my friend Emily is on here. She also has had to deal with all the vilification of the ketogenic diet and low carb diets and Atkins diets for so many years. And it's one of those things that generationally they can't wrap their heads around it. So I get it, and I'm sorry that you can't get them to play ball, but I definitely understand. Joshua, what you got for me?
That's just been my frustration. But
Yeah.
thanks so much for the information.
Thank you, Rob.